Thank you for letting me come. I typically go by the name Pam, and this is my sign name. It's a huge honor to be here, and I would like to thank all of you. Like Karen said, I graduated from here in 2003 with my bachelor's in information technology. The topic of my presentation is to be your own advocate as a deaf person in the corporate world. Just to give you some advice of how to succeed and give you counsel how to succeed as you move on in co-ops and in your job. I will say, though, that my family is deaf. They met at Gallaudet, fell in love, and got married. And then after they were married, they had my brother and sister, and then I was born third. And when I was 1 year old, we moved from Maryland to Minnesota. So I grew up in Minnesota. My family has been there ever since and has really settled down there. So I was born into a deaf family, grew up signing. I went to an elementary school that had a deaf program, even though it was a public school. And my teacher signed more pidgin sign language or signed exact English. And so I had some of that influence growing up. In middle school, I don't know, have you heard of Metro School, Deaf School? It was founded in, I think, 1994. And my father was one of the founders of that school. And it was a charter school. At that point, I was not really excited about going to a dorm and going to a deaf school. So Metro Deaf School was set up to be a day school, and there were, I think, 13 of us in the whole school, and that was just a very different experience. After the second year, after it was founded, I think we expanded up to 20, and then the school as a whole was limited at 7th grade. So my family was deciding where I should go after 7th grade, and we were a little bit nervous about going to a mainstream school and having an interpreter. Plus, you know, teenage years are always a little bit awkward and scary. And my best friend decided she wanted to go to MSSD, Model Secondary School for the Deaf, and she applied, and I decided to follow along with her. Always growing up, we had been together. I applied and was accepted, but my friend actually transferred to a mainstream school rather than going to MSSD. And that time, I had to make that decision. It was far away, it was in DC. In Minnesota, my deaf school had been right next to my home, but I decided to go for it and go ahead and go to MSSD. And I had a great theater program, which was one reason that I was really excited about going. I was very into that, but it was so far away. And at that time, I was only 13 years old. I was in a dorm, it was in DC. Sometimes it could be a dangerous area, but I decided to go anyway and really got involved with the theater community. And I started to realize that I liked computers. I took some computer classes and started to realize that I really had a taste for that. And at that time, we had Apple computers, and I was just kind of nosy. I wanted to see how the system was set up. I was gonna see if I could change some of the things and change the memory and that kind of thing. And now Apple's, when it opened up back in the old days, it had this big smiley face. And one time, I saw a frowny face with these X's on its eyes, and I'd never seen that before because I was trying to reboot the system. But because I decided to break in and kind of creep into what the system looked like, I found out that I really loved it. At that time, IBM had developed a computer called the PC Junior, and it used a black and white monitor. My brother was just studying and trying to incorporate different programs, and the memory command was something that we were studying. At that time,
I tried to take command of the root on the computer with the command line, and I typed delete star. My brother, I put delete star. Whoa, that meant erase everything possible to erase. So I just wiped out the computer. And then when I got to high school, I took a computer class, and we started working with the internet.
And then my senior year of high school, I was thinking, should I go to Gallaudet? I had two options in my mind, RIT or the University of Minnesota or Gallaudet. My parents, aunts, uncles, everyone in my family had gone to Gallaudet at that time, but I wasn't really sure if it had what I wanted. I was considering accounting, but didn't think it was quite right for me. But one thing that I was interested in too was trying to become an astronaut. But that didn't seem quite the fit for me either. And RIT NTID had a lot of technical options, and I decided to go with that. So after I was admitted in the fall of 1999, I came in as an NTID student. I came in as undeclared science majors with some of my friends. I knew that we were going to go for bachelor's degrees, my friends and I. I took a chemistry class, I took a computer science class, and I was trying to figure out if I wanted to go the computer route or with more of the hard sciences. But it was funny because the first quarter I was here, I know you guys are on semesters now, but during my time, we were on quarters, and I did love it. But that quarter that I was here, I took Computer Science 1. It was 6 credits. It was like 2 hours every day with a lab every Friday in the mornings at 8 a.m. And I went every time, and I was not used to it. I was experiencing some challenges. And it was the first time that I was learning programming languages. I was learning Java at the time. I was using an interpreter. It was my first mainstream class. There were like 50 students. It was dark. There was light on the interpreter. And it felt very odd. I didn't understand some of these concepts in Java. I was struggling a lot in this class. But I pushed through it. And there was also another class that I took that really influenced me, which was trig. And trig I was not used to either. I grew up at a deaf school. I was used to a signing teacher who was fluent in ASL, and I had always been an A student. I always felt like I needed to be perfect, needed to have that 4.0. I graduated as the valedictorian from my high school, and so facing some of these challenges and feeling like I was failing in this trig class and having bad grades really scared me, and I ended up withdrawing. I was confused at that time. And in my computer science class, I was also struggling and feeling like I was failing, and I felt, am I in the right place? Am I doing the right thing? So I finally finished that class. I think I passed the computer science class with a C, and it was the first time in my life I'd ever gotten a C. And my GPA dropped below a 4.0, and it was just very confusing. But that next quarter, I decided to come here and try the trigonometry again. I think it was maybe pre-trig or something like that. And so I reviewed and I learned a lot of those things that I missed. And once I understood it, the next quarter, I came back to RIT and I took calculus, and I was able to get all A's through all of those courses in math. And so one thing I want to leave with you guys, that it's okay to fail. It's okay to make mistakes. Just take the time to back up, make that decision, to work through it, to review what you need to work through, and be able to succeed once you come back again. And it's just, you should know that it's okay to take a step back if it's for your success. Honestly, I was terrified. I was scared to figure out what I should do. I went to advising meetings and figured out what I wanted to do for my major. But finally, after I was able to go through that experience, I was able to recognize that I wanted to do IT. And that was different than what I had thought before. Today, RIT has many different branches of IT. You guys have, what is it, HCC and game design? There's something else somebody told me. CIT, I think, is your department name or something. It's very different than back then. We talked about networking in IT, and we talked about Visual Basic and databases. And it seems like it wasn't as deep, but for my own experience, I wasn't sure when I originally picked IT. I did enjoy the classes. I knew that I liked Visual Basic better than Java, obviously. Visual learning is a strength of mine. But despite that struggle, I went ahead and decided to pick my IT major. And then in my time, I also had to pick 2 concentrations. So I decided to pick databases, which was a more in-depth class. I think there were 3 advanced classes in databases. There was administration and management, and SQL. And one of the classes that we had to take was SQL and management and administration. And for my second concentration, I picked system administration. And at that point, we used shell script. We used a lot of that and different authorizations, which I both liked my concentrations. They gave me more in-depth knowledge. I also took a networking class, and I hated it. It was just something I had to take and get through for the major. But looking back, that has so much application to the work that I do today.
Also, when I was a student here, I was involved in a lot of activities, which, you know, fills out your resume. I would go to class, and you can just do that. But you want to be a well-rounded student. You want to volunteer, participate in sororities, do volunteer work, get on boards. That's how you learn how to become a leader. I was involved with theater a lot here. That was my second home, actually. If you didn't see me in the computer lab, I was over in the theater. I worked as an electrician there. I would set up the lights. I would be a lighting designer for several of the productions. I stage managed. I have that experience. I did the gamut in the technical aspect of theater. I got a credential in technical theater, and I really enjoyed it. I was involved in the College Bowl as well. You see the trophy that's outside the door. I think it's a fake one. I'm not really sure. Is that a real one? Oh, it looks so different now. I had to ask. I wasn't sure if that was a real one or not. The one like I won years ago. I won in 2002. We won the College Bowl. It was thrilling because Gallaudet was persistently winning, and finally we won one. It felt great. I was involved in the peer English tutoring. I'd help students with their English. I just did a lot of work with, I encourage students here to join clubs, get involved, do the shows. There's a lot, the list is long of what you can get involved with the various clubs today. I don't know what you have, but I'm sure there are plenty of opportunities out there for you to get involved. It helps you develop your leadership skills. It also help you once you get to your co-op, knowing how to deal with the world out there, the hearing world out there. My major demanded or necessitated 3 co-ops, each 9 weeks long, or 2 co-ops that would be 9 weeks, one for 9 weeks, one for 18 weeks. It would be a quarter, and 1 quarter, or 2 quarters. Anyway, there are 3 different co-ops that were required. So that was, I had to look for my first co-op, and it was really stressful. I had to do that in my second year, so I thought, I'm going to ask my father. My father owned an accounting business. And I went to him and I said, do you know any of your clientele that would have an internship that has to deal with IT? And my dad asked around and found a gentleman and said, yeah, he wouldn't mind taking me. His name is, it was with TR Computer Sales. It was a small company, 6 employees, no interpreter. I just was willing to go in there. It was nice. They paid me a bit. And looking back on that, it was heavily on the hardware end of the business, and it wasn't something that I was really interested in at the time, but it was still a good experience. Working with the hearing people, we wrote notes back and forth. We used AOL, Instant Messenger back then, and I know that's no longer around. And we used AIM back and forth, and we wrote notes back and forth. And the company itself traveled a lot, or it involved traveling, so I got to travel to different places. I went to, I'm trying to remember. You go to like the eye doctor office, the optometrist. Let's say if their printer was broken, we would go there and sit and try to fix it, or see if they needed new drivers or new hardware or software that needed to be put in. But I got to see different environments. I got to go to different places. One, I remember I went to a huge warehouse with, I have no idea what they were making. It was some sort of factory with a lot of machinery, and some particular piece of machinery was broken, so I went with one of the workers who was talking away, but that was the client, and I had no idea what they were talking about. They were talking with each other, but I stood there and I watched. And in those days I went, and I remember that day was a huge thunder and lightning storm. And all the electricity went off. It was a blackout. And imagine, I'm in a warehouse, a factory, a huge factory that went totally dark, and I'm standing there alone, can't hear. I thought, I better not move. I was scared, trying to look for some emergency lights. But, you know, there's these kinds of experiences that you get. As an internship, you're going to go to different places. You're going to experience these different things. There was another one. There was a daycare center. It was, and they needed new wiring for their internet connection. So going into we went to the store to set up this this wiring, and you know, we were looking for the jacks to plug in the internet and oh, my hands were hurt because we actually had to physically, we're setting up these connections. It was a new building, all new wiring. So I look back and I didn't like that kind of work, but it was a great learning experience. The owner of the company, I am still in touch with that owner. I like to check in and see how he's doing. You don't want to forget people. You want to check in and stay connected with the people, with your bosses, with your managers, with your friends. It's really good not to burn bridges and to keep that communication going. Now I want to talk about how I got my internship at IBM. I don't know if they still have that here, but they had a program called Entry Point /AAAS. I don't know if that program is still going on now, but at my time, you could see flyers everywhere. If you're a student that needs an internship, sign up. They have IBM, different companies, Google, and I was looking through all the companies as I was wondering, where can I find a co-op? So I went to one of my sorority sisters, and she said for sure she had an internship at IBM, and she got it through this Entry Point program. So I asked for the name, and she encouraged me to go for it. Got some letters of recommendation sent off to them. A month later, I was contacted from the office in Minnesota through TTY. I don't know if anybody here remembers what a TTY is, but we type back and forth. They typed to me on the TTY. And the person wanted to hire me. He was a hiring manager and said, "Are you interested in an internship at IBM in Minnesota?" I said, "Sure." "In 2 weeks, can you come?" And I said, 2 weeks? It was February. Pretty soon we were coming on spring break, but I thought I was supposed to go somewhere, but I dropped everything. I had my dad come and drive me. We canceled the apartment, we packed everything up, and off I went to IBM in Rochester, Minnesota. Same, they have a Rochester here. The sign is different. Here is Rochester. There, it's signed Rochester. A bit confusing, I know. Now, my folks live in St. Paul, Minnesota, and Rochester, Minnesota is about 75 miles away. So that means I could actually live there in Rochester. That would mean that I'd be the first time on my own. IBM had a list of people that said they didn't mind having a roommate, so my mom and I drove down there. We looked at 3 or 4 different places, found one that seemed pretty good. There was a woman there, I think her son, he had a basement room with its own private bathroom. The woman herself, she worked at IBM, so we thought, well, that was good. So that was my first apartment. I moved in and went to work. My manager at IBM used a wheelchair. My manager was part of that program called Entry Point as well. It was a program that encouraged disabled people to work in the corporate world. So I had this woman in Minnesota. They said, "Oh, we need somebody. This woman needs an internship, so we'll place her here." So I worked on that. I was setting up servers, setting up wiring. Again, I was working in hardware. There's hardware involved, not so much software, but I learned how to wire. I really observed, did a lot of fixing. I worked on my own. I learned Perl. I heard it was a good language at the time, so I learned that. IBM is huge. The facilities themselves are a mile long, and they have their own library, which I would go to every day to do reading of different books on Perl and different computer languages. I did that on my own. And sometimes I would get bored and I would ask a coworker to, come with me, but sometimes there'd be nobody there, so I'd have to learn it on my own. So you have to be self-motivated. During your co-ops, you can't, you have to go out there and keep yourself busy and think of things to do on your own and create your own projects.
This was also the first time that I learned about AIX. I don't know if you guys know about Linux, but IBM had its own unique version of that. So I was able to learn that as well and learn about the filing system, which was, again, a new experience for me. And I also worked with DB2, which I know that there is a class here for that. But when I was actually on the job, I was able to learn DB2. IBM actually owns it. It's an IBM product. So I was able to learn that, and then the life sciences program that I worked with was able to tap me to talk about different things that they needed. So they had a drop table that they were asking me about and SQL questions. And sometimes I would just Google it and then tell them the answer. And it felt like I was more like tech support sometimes too. I didn't have an idea necessarily of what to do, but still was able to problem solve and figure that out, make tables for them. And also just, again, through my own motivation, try to learn some of those things. My manager really emphasized the fact that volunteering was important and brought me it was the Center for Independent Living for some disabled people who needed help to be able to live independently. And so they would have meetings, and one of the ways that I volunteered was to be able to develop a website for them. And so my manager really supported getting involved in the community and emphasized how key that was to be able to get plugged in. So I was able to develop websites and that kind of thing. But really that manager for that co-op was really encouraging. He said, make your voice heard. Don't be shy. You really need to be able to speak up in meetings. If I'm just sitting there and being quiet and not being involved in the work, that was something that I needed to learn. And so I imagine that all of us feel that way at some point. We feel like we want to speak up, but is the interpreter going to say the right thing? Am I going to look dumb? Am I going to look awkward? And some of those kind of things. And so really to have my manager say, hey, you can do this. You can take on this leadership and really speak up and make your voice heard in that was something that was really beneficial for me in that co-op. After that, after my co-op was finished in August, I came back to RAT. Let's see, I was out from February until August, and then I came back in the fall, and I realized that some of my friendships had changed. They weren't in the same place. Some had graduated, some had gone out on internships, and it definitely felt different. I felt like an outsider again coming back after I had been plugged in for so long. And so that was definitely something that I struggled with again in the fall, is making some of those new friends. But I got plugged into the theater again, and it was also my senior year, which meant I had to be job searching for a full-time job that coming May. I don't think the NTID had a job fair quite yet, but RAT did. I know they did at the gym, and so I hadn't been before, but I decided to go over to the job fair that was just outside of here in a little bit of a different place. So a few of my friends and I, with an interpreter, went over, and it felt kind of weird. I passed my resume around, and I tried a lot of things. I also applied online to different programs. I flew to Minnesota during Thanksgiving and Christmas break, and again, asking my dad to interpret for me. He's hard of hearing, so he was able to interpret for a few different interviews. But it was hard. Job searching is hard, and so I know that that is a struggle that we all have in common at times. In the fall, I was searching for various job positions, and then IBM actually contacted me. I didn't reach out to them, but they reached out to me. And I got an email that said, are you interested in a job? We have job availabilities and in Kansas City, and we have various interviews. And knowing that I was deaf, they said, can you AIM? Again, AIM was very popular. It was the cool thing to do. And so I said, are you willing to use that? And so it was slower, but we still were able to type back and forth. And he said, we would like to do a phone interview. And I said, that's all right. But I do use relay services, but sometimes it has a little bit of a delay. And so I asked if we could use TTY. And after we used the TTY, the man interviewing me realized that that was a little bit slow, so they offered to fly me out. But anyway, so my interview story. I went and waited for the shuttle bus that was going from the hotel to IBM. And there was also another man there who was ready to interview, who was a student, just the same as me. He was a hearing guy. I forget what university he was from. The company actually had gotten an interpreter for me, and she contacted me ahead of time, asked for my resume, and I was very impressed with that interpreter. So I gave her everything so that she could study, and of course I wanted to do well in my interview, so I was relieved that she asked for that. But once I actually met her in person, she had just graduated from an interpreter training program. I mean, just recently. Thankfully, she was a NICS certified interpreter, like master level, and so that was wonderful. But they found her as a church interpreter, so I'm so grateful for that. It was interesting because we were just the same age. We had both just graduated, but I really think that helped me a lot. It helped my interview because I was so nervous, and I know that I probably wasn't signing very clearly, but she seemed to interpret so well, and that was really a help to me. And so I had interviews all day from 8 until 5 with various managers going place to place. And on site at IBM, they had many different jobs. And so each different manager in whatever field, so let's say the field of development, we would discuss development, and I would think about maybe having a job in that area. And then there was another new builds program talking about maintenance on everyday builds and that kind of thing. And so I was interested to learn about that job potentially. Then I went to the next manager and then the next. And I wasn't sure still exactly what I wanted. Maybe development, maybe something else. But until I finally got to quality assurance testing. And once I was talking with that manager, I was curious. I said, I don't know what that is. Can you explain more to me? And so he was talking about you have to be able to debug programs and figure out what kind of stresses can go on these different applications. And I knew at that moment with that interview, I said, you know, I think that's what I want to do. I was waiting for that interview. It was like a light that went off. I said, yes, I want this job. So I started asking all of these questions. And to be able, for the manager to be able to see my excitement with that, after that interview, I sat down with, I think, another manager, and he convinced me why Kansas City is cool, because apparently it was hard to recruit people to Kansas City because there are all these wonderful cities like New York, Washington, D.C., Seattle, and they are having a hard time getting people to move to Kansas City. I mean, at that time, I didn't care. I was excited about having a job, and so it was interesting to me that he had to convince me to come to that particular city. But he offered me the job that was going to start in November. And I was going to graduate that next May. Now, I had just flown, so I flew into Kansas City, and then I was flying home for Thanksgiving. And so I was talking with other people to say, I had a month to decide, and I was trying to figure out if it was worth it to take that job or to still look for another one. So I decided to accept the position, but I asked if they would delay my starting date until August. Which was a risk to be able to ask for that. But the manager said, no, that'd be wonderful, go ahead and enjoy your summer. Because every summer up to that point, I had always worked, whether I had an internship or I had summer classes, I felt like I was always working. And so the chance to be able to have that opportunity to be free after graduation for the first time in so long, I traveled the US, I went to California, I went to South Dakota and traveled all over the US, and then in August, a little bit depressingly, I had to drive to Kansas City. Except for my interview experience, I had never been in Kansas City. I think I might have been there once before, but I thought it was a bunch of farmlands, maybe a bunch of towns. And once I finally got there, I realized that it actually is a city, and it has shops and, a life. And so there weren't any lakes like there was at home in Minnesota. They had a few lakes, but it felt pretty comparable to some of the life I've lived. It was a real city. It had a downtown. I think it's actually bigger than Rochester here. I also had never tried software testing, so the city was new, my job was new, but I also had a lot of excitement and motivation for it. And like I said, Kansas City wasn't incredibly far from Minnesota. I think it was a 6 or 7 hour drive. So every month I would go home, and then every 2 months I would go home, and then once a year I'd go home, and then my parents would be begging me to come home because I was a little bit tired of driving at that point. And I also had a dog, so I had to figure out how I was going to be able to get home. It was close enough, but I know that was a little different. The people were great. The deaf community is pretty good. There were no particular cliques that I noticed, and it was a very friendly place. Now, I also wanted to be able to get connected with the deaf community that was there. I did know one person who had previously taught at Metro School for the Deaf, and so I was able to look it up on white pages or yellow pages, whatever it was. And so I was looking for their name, my teacher's name, and she wasn't there, and so I got on the internet, and I knew that she worked at the Kansas School for the Deaf. So I found her name, and I sent her an email, and she contacted me and said, "Oh, I'm so surprised that you're here. We'll have to meet up sometime." And I haven't seen you in 13 or 14 years. I mean, at that time, I had been 13. The last I had been at Metro School for the Deaf. So now I was an adult, and she became one of my good friends in the new city and introduced me to many people in the deaf community.
I've been working in testing for Informix, which is a database server. It's similar to my SQL, or I don't know what classes you're taking here, if you have those classes yet, but it's testing that matches my field because I took database classes and it matched what I took. People that major in computer science, the mathematics, software engineering, I was the only IT person. So I got there, and it was a little odd because the classes didn't always fit, or my classes fit with the work. Looking back, though, I think, maybe I should have changed my major. I don't know. I won't go into too much depth about what I do, but, I test various things like black box versus white box. Now, I'm a tester. I work with black box. You can't see in. Yes, it's like a program. I can't see the code. I test it, run it. It's, I do, as if I'm a consumer. I'm going to work on it and see if I can break it and see where it breaks. That's in the black box. Now, the developing side, they can actually see the code. They do their testing to make sure that the code is actually working, that the functions are working, and they know where the code is and they know what it's doing. So it's two different perspectives working on a system. It's as if we're playing with the product to see if it's going to work or where it's going to fail. And we're trying to debug it, and we can be able to figure out, if we can see where it fails, we can figure out where we can fix it. And I really enjoy that work. It's very open concept. Next is functional. That's sort of working within the black box. It's simple, basic testing, making sure that the SQL language is working. Very simple tests. Performance, nothing too in-depth, nothing too complicated. Stress and performance is like the concept behind that is, say we're coming up on Black Friday, when everybody wants to shop on Amazon and Amazon crashes. That Amazon won't look good if that happens, if there's too many people, buying on them and they can't carry the load. But it's so if there's too much stress on the system, we have to figure out how to keep it going. At the same time, the performance part of it is making sure that it's fast, that they can answer online quick enough with, everybody's on, and that they can process the orders and everything comes up, the credit cards can go through, that it doesn't slow down. If it slows down, then they'll lose the sales and their performance will go down. So there's a variety of tests that we can do for both those areas. Usability is making sure that it's a friendly enough system. If a person that's looking at a website, do they know where they can log off or log on? How do I log on to this thing? That if you can't figure out how to get onto the website, if it's not a good program or it's not a good website, if they've got a clear space where a person can find it, if you can sit down and look at that website, see that it's clear, it's got nice colors, it's got something that it's easy to use, like the Apple iPhone. It's beautiful. It's so user-friendly. The next one, if I get a program, we're working on Linux, Red Hat, 6.2. We're testing it. Seems to be working fine. We certify it that it's great. Nothing's going wrong with it. Then a new system, new operating system comes up. We've tested that. That's fine. We certify that. We go through all these tests. I won't go through every single one of them. It's not necessary, but that's the type of testing. Interoperability means, can one product work with another product? Let me think of an example. If you have a website, will that work with an Oracle server? Will they be able to communicate with each other? Will different products be able to interface with each other and work? Those always break. So they give the product to the client and they say, oh, it doesn't work with the server. Oh gosh, then we have to fix it. The point is to make sure that the products are of good quality and we can release them. And then there are new features that are always being continually added on. We test those, release them. Sometimes if we have to fix it, make a patch. In testing, we're making sure that the quality is good. We write codes. It's, not typing, the written codes mostly are done in Java. Those are written up, then you click a button and it runs. Is it automatic? And then it runs on itself every day. Oh, I'd say like 10,000 or 20,000 tests are run automatically all day, all night, overnight, I would say. They're, running on different platforms, a variety of platforms all over the place. Our teams divide up who works on what. Some teams come in the morning and find a quote-unquote red button. That means, uh-oh, something's bad there. That test has failed, possibly for the first time. We go back and look at why, figure out why it failed. We figure maybe the test, maybe the new feature messed it up, or the new feature is no good, or maybe my machine itself has a problem within it, or perhaps there is a real bug in there. And if that's it, I feel great because we do a bug report, explain what's happening with that, send it off to developers, and they go, rats, gotta fix that. I love it. I love debugging. It's really, I am developers. Really, you want to open another bug report? I'm like, yes, I do, because that means bad news for them. Here at RIT, you take classes, I don't know, what languages are you using today? Is it C? Is it Java? Or C#? Or C Java? I understand Java, that's really mine. But you're using C#. But Java I understand. Once you know one language, you can transfer to any other language. It's like figuring out Google scripts, or you can transfer back and forth. There are so many different languages out there now, you can hop back and forth. If you get one, you can do a quick lookup on the internet. There's tons of knowledge out there. There's lots of structures out there where you can figure out what those languages are. I work strongly with SQL. I understand that. That's where my expertise lies. In database work, I use relational databases. well, currently, right now, relational's gone, and we're going to warehouse. It's not on there. A warehouse is a new, it's a new concept. RIT, I think the students are learning tablet and it's transaction. Where, let's say you're drawing money from an ATM and then it gets posted with the bank, that's transactional. It's kind of a simple concept, but I know they're studying that at RIT now. IBM is totally changing that. So now we're learning star schema, that's the name of it. It's a totally different than what I learned at RIT. I had to throw out all that information, learn all the new concepts, the new theories, put what I learned aside, but I'm constantly learning new things. Technology changes, theories change. It's a fast-paced world, so you have to be fast-paced to keep up with it. You have to have strong problem-solving skills, analytical skills to debug. If this isn't it, what could it be? You have to be able to figure it out. You have to be really stubborn and keep at it. And it's as if you have to keep your head going for 24 hours, and then that solution will come, and you'll be able to figure it out. You know, how you do that, I don't know. You have to practice. When I first started at work, I was really awkward in doing analysis and how to read logs and files and going back and forth and getting that broad spectrum. I don't know, it's just really practicing it. I've been doing it for 13 years now, and for me it's simple. I look at it and I know what the problem is. But it really just takes time. So you have to go through that period where you will struggle and it'll feel awkward, but then you will get it. I'd look for red with the word fail. You get there and you spot that. Then I'd have to look out at the product version. Every day there's a version switch or a version change. And you see the number there, it's N096. Tomorrow will be N097. It increases in numbers. So we open up the bug report. The developers look at that and they look at the building number and go, oh, of course, I just recently fixed that. That's why that caused that bug. We found out where that happened or where it started from. I don't know if you've experienced this, but how to open a bug report. This is what it would look like. You use ClearQuest. ClearQuest is where you type in, you open up, I don't know, a ticket. It's called a ticket. It's a bug number. You type that in and it says this is what failed, why, and how to reproduce the particular bug. A build number where it occurred. Use Eclipse. Some of you are familiar with Eclipse. I see some hands out there. It's pretty similar to what we use, Eclipse, to develop. It's to develop testing. It's used in developing and testing. Still used today. This is just an example of another test. We're trying to pinpoint and catch any errors in printing. Well, back to my story. I graduated with my BS. I thought I was done, finished with school. You know, now I'm working and I'm done with school. I don't want to do school anymore. I don't want to go for my master's. Just don't want to do that. Until I saw my peers, my colleagues, people of my age, all getting their masters. And I started to feel a little stressed that, you know, being deaf, I have to keep up with my peers and my colleagues. Now, fortunately, RIT invited me to come back here in, I think it was 2006 or 2007, to give a speech over at Gallaudet. So I gave my speech over there, and, you know, there's a bunch of majors listed on the wall. So I was kind of looking through, and I spotted software development management. So I opened up this brochure on this, and I thought, ooh, I like this, and I like that. It seemed pretty positive. And if you graduated from RIT, you didn't have to take the GRE. So
But at any rate, I was able to do testing for a long time at IBM, but eventually I got a little bit tired of it. It's not exactly always a dream of mine to continue to do the usability testing, so I decided to ask to switch to a different team and try developing a little bit more. I wasn't sure about coding, but I thought, you know what, I can try developing after I had been in testing for a while. So they decided to let me switch teams, and that team was the hardest experience that I've had working, I think, in my life. It was hardware programs, and that was just not my thing. I was thinking of software, but what ended up happening is I was transferred to a hardware team, and it was very challenging. So it was kind of 2 years in hell, but it worked out. So I learned how to work as a developer. And one thing that I can see is, from my perspective as a tester, I was always curious about what it was like on the white box side of it as a developer. And wow, is there a lot of stress. There are a lot of emergencies that need fixes now. And so it's just a very high stress environment, and you have to meet a lot of deadlines and that kind of thing. But with a black box, what I was doing with usability testing, there was no clients. I was the pseudo client. But with the developers, they're actually dealing with clients, and sometimes they're international. Oh, well, actually, what would usually happen was we would give a bug. Someone would give us a bug, and we would have to figure it out. So I had been on the side where I was giving bugs to the developers, but now I was on the other side. I was having to find exactly where in the code this bug was coming from. And often I felt that feeling of failure come up again, because often people say, well, obviously we know just where it is, but as a developer, you do have to find the details and be able to find where that is. And often I wasn't able to understand always where the code was. There's not always one file. Codes are in multiple files, various dictionaries, various languages, and so to be able to find exactly where the code is very challenging. And finding the pathways and being able to decode that, to be able to record it, and finally be able to fix a bug sometimes would take me a really long time. Sometimes it took me up to a month to be able to really be able to understand that. Typically, I felt like I was a fast learner and usually a quick study, but that was such a challenging area to me. And it was also high risk, because IBM is a very fast-paced company. It doesn't like slow employees. If it's taking you a few days, they're saying, hey, what's up? What's wrong? And sometimes it's just that you're just new to that area. And it was very challenging, and I definitely wanted to give up, but I had to persevere through that. But after I worked there for about 2 years, I said, you know what, this isn't for me, I'm done. And so after that, even though I had felt fed up with testing beforehand, I was really missing it after the end of that 2 years. So I was able to transfer to a different team, and I had one of my good friends who was a hearing colleague who had friends in Kansas City, and I was part of the family there at IBM with this particular friend. And she said, hey, this is a really hot topic right now. She was talking about the cloud, and at that time, I didn't realize that was gonna be such a hot topic. But she said the manager wanted me to come, but the manager I was working under at the time said, nope, we want you to stay on this team. But through networking, I was able to talk to the executive of that particular building, who was one of my friends, and I had gone to his son's art show. And by the way, everyone, it is very important to make some of those personal connections when you are networking. Ask about people's families, ask about their wives, ask about their kids. And so when the time came that I needed to have that connection, I was able to talk to the executive and say, hey, I would really like to switch teams. I feel I would be useful here. And so I was able to switch to that team. And so how worth it was it that I was able to network? So I had to be able to thank someone. for that. But I was so glad that I was able to reach out to that particular executive and transfer over. And I was so happy to be gone from that couple of years that were so difficult. So I do want to tell you that networking is really important. But then once I got to my new team, I found out that my new manager was the friend who had tapped me to ask if I would move to the new team. And I was shocked. I said, "Why did you grab me to join your team? You're going to be my manager now." But it was actually really nice to have a pre-built friendship and not have to always be really assertive and meet new people. So finding out that those years when I was first new in Kansas City, making friends and meeting people, writing notes back and forth really paid off, because it's easy to communicate with my manager now. Even if there's a lot of stress, I'm able to tell her about it, and I'm able to be a team lead now. I work with other people who are under me, and she gives me a lot of good work that I'm able to do. A lot of, it's important to be visible in your company. You need to have your company know who you are. IBM needs to know who I am. Sometimes there are at different times where people are laid off. And so if I'm able to be visible in the company and know that the managers see me and see my work still, it really pays off. It's job security, because it is sometimes cutthroat out there. You have to be able to show that your work is authentic. You're able to show that you are willing to take challenges in leadership positions and make it hard for people to cut you. It's important to make yourself valuable. I'm working a lot with big data. I'm working a lot with SQL, Facebook, but just getting a lot of crowdsourced information, looking where people post. You know, sometimes when it's tagged with either your location or your time. So really, big data is like what people need. It's kind of like oil. You know, we talk about how everyone wants gasoline. It's what everybody really goes for in the material world. Well, that's what big data is for us. It's just a huge mine that's wealthy that we need to be able to drill. So one of the things that we look at is location and times for specific places to talk about advertising, like the Super Bowl. I don't know if you saw one ad that happened, it was like the baby monkey or something like that. People were talking about how terrible this ad was. So there was just a mine worth of data that we were able to get and talk to the advertisers. Now, I am the only deaf employee in my building. I write a lot back and forth with people. I'll write on the board. I just try to get creative with my communication. So find different ways, experiment. Try dragon speak. If that doesn't work, there are a lot of foreign people who are in my department, a lot of people who are from international places. And so sometimes voice recognition technology doesn't always work. I'll write back and forth, and once in a while I do have an interpreter. I know one thing for me is that IBM typically contracts with an agency that's in the area for interpreters. But when I first got there, I realized that the agency didn't necessarily have interpreters who were qualified or skilled. And I had to figure out a way to be able to tell IBM they contracted with an agency that wasn't the highest quality. So after a few times that I had bad experiences, like one time in a meeting when there were 2 interpreters who came with a lot of technical interpreting. One team was working, one of the interpreters was working and needed support, and the other interpreter was sitting there with their newspaper open, not paying attention at all to their team. And I knew that I just couldn't deal with that. So I sent a message to the agency. I said, please don't send this interpreter to me again. It was unprofessional. And the next meeting, I had a different interpreter who came in, and she said, can I speak to you privately? And she said, why didn't you, that interpreter asked me, he said, why didn't you want to have that interpreter again? And so the boss of the agency sent this new interpreter to ask me why I didn't want to have that interpreter. And after that experience, I realized that I really didn't want IBM to be able to work with that particular agency again. So after talking with them, I was finally able to talk with my friends and find a reputable agency in the area who had qualified interpreters. It's really important for when you're going to whatever your job or co-op is, talk to your friends, talk to those in the community who know what the resources are there, and then be your own advocate within your company, because that is something that is really important. I'm shocked that the agency that IBM originally worked with is still there today after those experiences that were so bad. But luckily, we've contracted with another agency, and I've been able to work with interpreters who are female, who know the technical jargon, and who sign beautifully. And so it's been wonderful to be able to have those certified interpreters who I just always use. I go to them for those kind of things. I really love that. I'm so glad I want to keep them. Right now they're pregnant, which makes me very sad, so I have temporary subs and replacements. But I'm hoping that she's able to set up her own agency, because I've been working with one particular interpreter, or a group of interpreters, for a while now. I'm not afraid to talk with the interpreting agencies and say, these are the names that I want. I want to work with these particular people. But I always make sure to communicate with the agency ahead of time to say, this presentation is going to be very technical, it's going to be very heavy, so they're able to send qualified interpreters to that particular event. Or I'll make sure that I tell the agency that I will be presenting at a particular event, so they're able to send an interpreter who's qualified going from ASL into English. And so it's your right to be able to have a good interpreter, and it's important that you're able to educate those in the community. I know that I was passive at one point where I wouldn't speak up about an interpreter's quality or something like that, but looking back, I wish I had spoken up and been assertive, and to be able to advocate for myself to have good interpreting services. So it's important for you all to be able to feel that way now. If you need someone to be able to be replaced, feel that you have the right to do that.
If there's a speaker, it's a lot of work that's going to happen. We have interpreters. We don't limit it to just one. Don't just limit it to one kind of accommodation. There's VRI, there's VRS, there's interpreters, there's captionists. There's a variety of accesses. There's pen and paper. You have to be creative. You have to figure out what's going to fit you and what's going to fit the company. And every day you can use every mode. What works best? I do remember my manager really encouraged me to speak up for myself. Like I remember back in my internship with IBM, you have to be a leader, you have to show that enthusiasm, and I felt like, okay, all right. And then I was asked to lead a beta program for advocacy. Oh, it was similar to, we do testing on a program, they do the build, and then it hasn't been released yet, but we release it to a small group of consumers. It's called a beta, it's a testing group. We see if they like it or not, we make some changes, and then we can actually release it to a larger group. One of the consumers was talking about advocate, and I was like, well, with an interpreter, I don't know, how do I call consumers? So I had to think, okay, I'll use captioning plus an interpreter, because I need to do a report. I have the interpreter there. If I didn't understand the interpreter, I could look at the captioning over the internet of what the callers were saying, and kind of found that the consumer was so friendly, became quite close with us. At the same time, I had their permanent record, that transcript from the captioning. And so we could keep up on a weekly basis. So the captioning plus the interpreter, I know that I can get kind of expensive, but that only went for a couple of months. It was a great experience. But I encourage, my manager encouraged me, go ahead, you can do this. And I'm really thankful for that. But there's such a variety of people that we work with out there from different countries, from the north of the world, the south of the world. I've learned so many things from talking to people about their cultures, about their food, or their customs. I really enjoy talking to people about their culture and their customs, and then they talk to me about my culture. Malaysia, there's people from Malaysia. It's just really nice interacting with these people from all over the world. We have our own support group, the Deaf and Hard of Hearing, IBM. We tend to meet about once a year. We have presentations. We do it over a video phone or through VRI because people are all over the country. We bring in speakers sometimes. We're just there to support each other. Sometimes if a person has to fly to that particular place, do you know where I can find, we ask if they know where they can find an interpreter. It's a good support system. I'm the one person in my center that's deaf, but there are people all over the world. There's a person in Australia, another one in England. IBM is an equal opportunity employer. They do provide interpreters, they provide the captioning, they provide accessibility for people in wheelchairs, they have ramps. There's one employee that uses a wheelchair, and they figured out they had to make an accommodation. They had to make the door the button for the automatic door had to be lowered for that particular person. As a deaf person, they didn't think exactly what a person, they figured out my needs, but then a person comes in with a wheelchair and they have to figure out, you know, you have to have a ramp for a person in a chair. So they recognize that people have the different needs.
Some of the things that people were asking me that I've been pondering since then is talking about how my major of IT either fit my job or wasn't. Because it doesn't seem like it's very compatible necessarily. But after I was able to take some of my classes in database and systems management, it ended up fitting in way later. Some of the theory that I learned, sometimes I thought didn't necessarily match. But now I'm able to see where it's applicable. And now I look back and wish, hey, I wish I would have taken a software engineering class because that's something I do now. I know is a list of so many different majors that you can have within computers and technology, and that's a little overwhelming to me. There were 2 options when I was here, but to see how some of that applies has been interesting. I sometimes wonder, should I have done a different major, but it led me to where I am now, and I'm fortunate to have the job that I really love. One thing that's really important is that when opportunity knocks, that you just go ahead and grab it. There is so much opportunity out there. And if you're not seeing the opportunity, you have to go look for it. I think that some of you might know the University of Washington, I think, has an academic program for deaf and hard of hearing students in computer science fields. I think that the last one may have been in 2013, but I was able to contact them and said, hey, I want to volunteer with that. And I was able to take that initiative, and I went and I presented there. And if you see something, if you see an opportunity online or whatever, go ahead and contact them. You don't know what will open up. I was able to spend a month in Seattle in Washington State, and IBM was able to give me that time to grab that opportunity. So when you do see something, be assertive. Don't sit back and wait for opportunity to ring the flashing doorbell. Go ahead and look for it. So I encourage you to be careful what you post on social media, because people will look. I might meet you in person, but my first impression might not be when I meet you in person. It might be what I see on social media. So always, what you post on the internet is out there. Be careful. I'm lucky that during my time at college, Facebook wasn't necessarily that popular. if something happened, if there was a picture, a bad picture of me, it wasn't going to be posted on the internet. It's pretty lucky. You guys have to be even more responsible than the people who came before, because posting those things on Facebook can be really dangerous. Sometimes parents are ignorant. They don't understand what social media is. Luckily, your kids, whenever you have them, will have parents who are aware of how that works. But I just encourage you to be careful. All right, I think we're gonna open it up for questions. I don't know what time it is, but thank you all.